Hi, Mark Donovan here from Falcon Imagery, and today I am going to go over the National Airspace System and talk to you about the various types of airspace, the dimensional information about the airspace, as well as the cloud separation and visibility that you need as part of navigating and flying in our National Airspace System. So follow along. All right, today we're going to go over the National Airspace System. This is a pictorial view of the National Airspace System. With the various classifications of airspace. There are four types of airspace. We have Class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo airspace, which is considered controlled airspace. We have Class Golf airspace, which is the uncontrolled airspace. And then we have special use airspace and then other airspace. I'm going to dive deep into every one of these types of airspace. There are two primary categories of airspace. Again, regulatory airspace, Class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo airspace, as well as restricted and prohibited areas. And then for non-regulatory airspace categories, we have MOAs, or military operating areas, warning areas, alert areas, control firing areas, and national security areas. Within these two categories, there are four airspace types: the controlled, uncontrolled, special use, and other airspace, which I showed you in the previous slide. And then airspace categories and types are defined by the complexity or density of the aircraft movements, the nature of the operations conducted within that airspace, the level of safety required, and national public interest. So for example, the largest airports in our country, which are classified as Class Bravo airspace, they're classified as Class Bravo because they have a high density of air traffic coming into them. They've got a lot of instrument operations going on, or complex operations going on. And they're usually located in very populated areas or cities. And so for all those reasons, they get classified as Bravo. And as we go from Charlie to Delta and so on, the complexity and density of that traffic to those airports gets less, and thus why they're defined differently. If we look at the Class A airspace, this is airspace that generally is airspace starting at 18,000 feet MSL, or mean sea level, and goes up to and including flight level 600 or 60,000 feet. Included this airspace overlying waters within 12 nautical miles of the coast of the 48 contiguous states and Alaska. Unless otherwise authorized, all operations Class C airspace is conducted under instrument flight rules. Then take a look at Class Bravo airspace, or Class B. This is again associated with your nation's busiest airports with heavy instrument flight rules use, such as, again, Logan International Airport, O'Hare, and other major airports around the country. If you look at a kind of a profile view of a Class Bravo airspace, it looks like an upside down wedding cake. And there's at least two different lateral levels in it with various shelves, and they can vary in dimensions and heights depending on the airport. The airspace is configured normally, again, with two or more layers extending upwards to 10,000 feet above the airport's elevation and mean sea level. The horizontal radius that could extend outwards to 50 nautical miles. There's also typically a Mode C veil that extends outward to 30 nautical miles radius of the airport, where an aircraft has to have a transponder outputting a Mode C type signal so that air traffic control and the controlling tower know that you're coming or coming within the vicinity of the Class Bravo airspace. ATC clearance is required for all aircraft to operate in the area, and all aircraft that are so cleared receive separation services within that airspace. If we step down a level, we go to Class Charlie airspace. This has airports that have an operational control tower, are serviced by radar approach control, and have a certain number of IFR operations or passenger implements. Here in the state of New Hampshire, Class Charlie airspace would be represented by something like the Manchester, New Hampshire Airport, or Portland, Maine Airport. That's Class Charlie. It's generally defined as airspace from the surface to 4,000 feet above the airport elevation, MSL, mean sea level, with a radius of 5 nautical miles on the inner ring and an outer ring that's 10 nautical miles in radius from the primary airport from 1,200 feet to 4,000 feet MSL. So that ring shelf can occur anywhere from 1,200 feet upwards to the overlying top surface of the airspace of 4,000 feet. The Class Charlie airspace is represented by a thick magenta ring, as you see here on the right, whereas the Class Bravo airspace is represented by a thick blue set of rings or concentric rings around the Class Bravo airspace. Each aircraft must establish two-way radio communications with the ATC facility providing air traffic and services prior to entering the airspace, and thereafter must maintain those communications while within the airspace. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a clearance. This means that the controlling tower, ATC, has basically repeated back your call sign. So if you contact a tower, let's say a Manchester, New Hampshire tower, that you're inbound for that airport, if they come back with your tail number, then you have established communications. If they say aircraft calling, please hold, or please stand by, you have not established communications with that airport and thus can't not enter that airspace. You must stay outside of it until you establish communications by you receiving confirmation that they have communicated your tail number back to them, back to you. Going on, then we have Class D airspace, or Delta, generally defined as airspace from the surface up to 2,500 feet above the airport elevation, mean sea level, with a radius of 5 nautical miles. And it usually is surrounding those airports with an operational control tower. Class D airspace area configuration is individually tailored. Arrival extensions for instrument approaches procedures may be Class D or Class C airspace. Unless otherwise authorized, each aircraft must establish two-way radio communications with ATC facility, the tower, for example, providing air traffic and services prior to entering the airspace and thereafter maintain those communications while in the airspace. You notice here this is identified Class D airspace by a dashed thick blue line. I will also comment here that you'll notice that the field elevation is 603 feet MSL, and the top layer of, or ceiling of this Class D is 3,100 feet. So 2,500 feet plus the 600 gets us our 3,100 feet. And that's why we see 31 here in this box representing the top altitude. Controlled airspace Class E, and it is airspace that's not Class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta. It can have a beginning height at 700 feet or 1,200 feet AGL or above ground level, or 14,500 feet mean sea level, with a ceiling of up to 18,000 feet MSL. So basically, it goes up to just to the point where you get to Class Alpha airspace. You can see Class Echo here. It's a large amount of the airspace of the United States that's designated by Class E airspace. And again, it provides sufficient airspace for the safe control and separation of aircraft during IFR operations. All airspace above flight level 600 or 60,000 feet is Class E airspace as well. Then we have uncontrolled airspace, Class G. This is airspace that has not been designated as Class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo. It extends from the surface to the base of the overlying Class E airspace. If I go back one chart on this, you see Class Golf airspace going up to 14,500 feet MSL before it becomes Class Echo. Class G can end at a ceiling of 700 feet AGL or 1,200 AGL. But there are also many airports in Class G airspace right at the surface. So again, Class G extends from the surface to the base of the overlying Class Echo airspace. Although ATC has no authority or responsibility to control air traffic, pilots should remember there are visual flight rule minimums regarding cloud separation and visual distance that are required to fly in Class G airspace. We'll get into that later. Special use airspace, airspace in which certain activities must be confined to some lateral or vertical or both area. It's identified in aeronautical charts with notes and contact information of the controlling agency. If you look at a chart sectional on the back of it, and on the bottom tab of it, there'll be a legend, and you will see the type of airspace identified by a number or name with the controlling agency that's responsible for it, with either a frequency or a phone number. There may be limitations that are imposed on aircraft operations that are not part of those specific activities for that special use airspace. Certain special use airspace areas can create limitations on mixed use. Types of special use airspace include prohibited areas, restricted areas, warning areas, military operating areas, alert areas, and controlled firing areas. This area here, represented by this magenta hash line, represents a military operating area labeled Yankee 1 and 2 MOAs. We also have prohibited areas. These are aircraft flight that's prohibited, depicted as a P followed by a number. Here in the New Hampshire, Maine area, there's one associated with the Bush estate in Kennebunk, Maine. And basically you cannot operate below a certain altitude going over that prohibited area. It's identified on the sectional by a P with a number. Restricted areas operations are hazardous to non-participating aircraft and contains airspace within which the flight of aircraft, while not wholly prohibited, is subject to restrictions. It's designated by an R followed by a number. Again, you want to look at the controlling agency and reach out to them, or either through a frequency that you can call up on or through a phone number. We have warning areas. These are similar to restricted areas. However, the United States government does not have sole jurisdiction over the airspace. Airspace of defined dimensions extending from 3 nautical miles outward from the coast of the United States, containing activity that may be hazardous to non-participating aircraft. It may be located over both domestic or international waters. And it's designated by a W followed by a number. And again, you can locate the controlling agency on the legend at the bottom of this chart sectional. We then have military operating areas, which I just showed an example. These are used by military aircraft to maintain proficiency in tactical flying. Routes usually established below 10,000 feet MSL for operations at speed greater than 250 knots. Routes are identified as IFR or VFR, followed by a number. VFR 1, 2, 3 flights could be flown from 1500 AGL or below, so they're moving fast and low. It's airspace with defined vertical and lateral limits established for the purpose of separating certain military training activities from IFR traffic. It's again depicted in aeronautical charts by those magenta hash lines, and as the example I just showed you was a Yankee MOA. Now, this does not preclude the flight of VFR traffic in those areas, but it's wise to contact the controlling agent to see if the area is active or hot, and if it is, you may not want to be flying in that area during those times. We then have alert areas depicted in aeronautical charts with an A followed by a number. This could be to inform non-participating pilots of areas that may contain high volume of pilot training or unusual types of aerial activity. And then we have controlled firing areas, contains activities that if not conducted or in a controlled environment could be hazardous to non-participating aircraft. So it could be naval activity, shooting weapons off the coast, or it could even be on the land with certain other military operations. So again, you want to make sure if there's a CFA in your vicinity that you're not flying in it or over it while it's active. Kind of a few important terms to be aware of when it comes to the National Airspace System. Number one is the local airport advisory. It's an advisory service provided by flight service facilities. It's a service that includes local airport information or advisories, automated weather reporting with voice broadcasting, and ASOS and AWOS weather information, and other continuous direct reading instruments or manual observations that can be communicated over radio frequency to aircraft flying in the local area. Military training routes used by military aircraft to maintain tactical flying and proficiency. This is often routes similar to a Victor Airway that allow high-speed military traffic to kind of flow along those routes to an MOA, possibly from an Air Force base to an MOA. Another key phrase is temporary flight restrictions. A temporary flight restriction is a subset of a notice to air missions. It designates a flight restriction for a period of time over a certain area for such events as protecting persons or property in the air or on the surface for an existing or imminent hazard, such as maybe tornadoes or hurricanes coming in. Provides a safe environment for the operation of disaster relief. Basically excludes all other aircraft except for disaster relief aircraft. Prevent the unsafe congestion of sightseeing aircraft above an incident or event that may generate a high degree of public interest. It's for protecting declared national disaster areas or for humanitarian reasons, such as the state of Hawaii with its volcano eruptions. protecting heads of state, presidents, vice presidents, or other public figures, providing a safe environment for space agency operations and for certain parachute jump activities that may be going, or for air shows, for example. These are all examples of temporary flight restrictions. Aircraft alert areas could be for such activities as parachute jumping. Again, those are going to be showed on a sectional or chart supplement. These are shown on those types of maps, like a sectional, to indicate that they're, in this case, a particularly high level of parachute jumping in that vicinity, that airport. There's published VFR routes or Victor Airways or now GPS kind of routes for transitioning around or under through some complex airspace. Terms such as VFR flyaways, VFR quarters, Class B airspace, VFR transition routes, and terminal area VFR route are listed as part of these published VFR routes, generally found on VFR terminal area planning charts. So VFR terminal area for near a Bravo airport. Then we have national security areas, airspace of defined vertical and lateral dimensions established at locations where there's a requirement for increased security and safety of ground facilities. Could be some type of military complex type facility. Terminal radar service areas, these are areas where both IFR and VFR traffic can participate in it. Areas where participating manned aircraft pilots can receive additional radar services that help provide separation between IFR operations and VFR traffic. A couple others, air defense identification zones. These are land and water-based need, you need for a defense VFR flight plan to actually operate in these areas. So these are off the United States coast or up near our borders that you can find these ADIZ type airspaces. And then we have flight restricted zones. One primary example would be in the vicinity of the White House or capital area of Washington, D.C. A couple other key ones here, wildlife areas, wilderness areas, and national parks. You're requested as a pilot not to fly anything below 2,000 feet AGL when going over these areas for protecting the wildlife and fauna in that area, not to spook it. Similarly, with the NOAA marine areas off the coast, there's requirement to operate above 2,000 feet AGL. And lastly, tethered balloons. For observation of weather information, these types of balloons can extend up to 60,000 feet. So definitely want to make sure we're aware of them through flight briefing to make sure we're not going to run into a cable. In regards to the purpose of our ATC, there's two main objectives: to prevent the collisions between aircraft operating in the National Airspace System and to organize and expedite the flow of it. To expedite the flow and provide separation to prevent collisions. Those are the two primary responsibilities of ATC. ATC can provide additional services such as providing some weather information, but it's limited to factors such as traffic volume, frequency congestion, radar quality, control workload, higher priority duties, and just human physical limitations to scan and detect these situations that fall into this category. Operating rules and pilot equipment requirements. All aircraft operating in the National Airspace System are in compliance with CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, governing its certification and maintenance. All pilots operating today have completed rigorous pilot certification, training, and testing while operating in this space. And of equal importance is the proper execution of pre-flight planning, aeronautical decision-making, and risk management. So it's important here to understand that anybody flying in a national airspace system has to have gone through some formal training procedure, whether it be as a pilot flying manned aircraft or even for remote pilots flying drones. If they're flying in the National Airspace System, they will have received through, for example, a Part 107 certificate to fly a drone in a National Airspace System. And as part of the training, both with pilots for manned aircraft and non-manned aircraft, ADM, risk management, pre-flight planning are all key factors that have been communicated to these types of pilots as part of their training. Remote pilots need to be familiar with notice to air missions. We spoke a lot about the TFRs just a few minutes ago, temporary flight rules, but NOTAMs are time-critical aeronautical information that's either temporary in nature or not sufficiently known in advance to permit the publication of it in the aeronautical charts, like a sectional chart, or in other operational publications. The information receives immediate dissemination via the NOTAM system. NOTAMs contain current information that's considered essential to the safety of flight, as well as to supplement data affecting other operation publications. There are many different reasons that NOTAMs are issued. Hazards such as at air shows, parachute jumpings, kite flying, and rocket launches, flights by important people such as heads of state, inoperable lights on a tall object or obstruction, for example, if a tower or a crane gets erected near an airport, and the temporary erection of obstacles near airfields, again, like a crane. NOTAMs can also be published for migration habits of birds. As this fall and the spring season come about, there could be a lot of bird traffic, and that would also be listed as a NOTAM. NOTAMs are available in printed form through a subscription from the Superintendent of Documents or online at Pilot Web, which provides access to current NOTAM information. Local airport NOTAMs can be obtained online from other various websites, such as the Pilot Web website, which is an FAA-based website, the flightplan.com website, and AOPA.org, and many others. You can also call for a briefing through 1-800-WX-BRIEF, and they will also give you any relevant NOTAMs to the area that you'll be flying in. Most sites require free registration, acceptance of terms, but offer pilots updated NOTAMs and TFRs. Last thing I want to talk about today is the basic VFR weather minimum classifications in the various classes of airspace. So in class Alpha airspace, this is at 18,000 feet and above to 60,000 feet. Flight visibility is not required because you're flying an IFR flight plan, and distance from clouds is not applicable. So no visibility, no clearance from clouds is required when Class A because you're flying IFR. Class Bravo, at those large airports, like a Logan International Airport, you need 3 statutes mile visibility, and you need to be clear of clouds. Class Charlie airspace, you need 3 statute miles visibility. You need to stay 1,000 feet above the clouds, 500 feet below them, or 2,000 feet horizontally from them. Class Delta, same rules. Class D, you need 3 statute miles of visibility. You need to be 1,000 feet above the clouds, 500 feet below, or 500 feet below them, and 2,000 feet horizontally away from them. Class Echo airspace, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. If you're flying at or above 10,000 feet MSL, you need 5 statute miles of visibility, and then you need to be separated from the clouds by at least 1,000 feet both above and below, and you need to be at least 1 statute mile horizontally away from them. If you're flying less than 10,000 feet MSL, you only need 3 statute miles of visibility. You need to fly either 1,000 feet above the clouds, 500 feet below the clouds, and 2,000 feet horizontally away from them. And then Class G, or uncontrolled airspace, has the most complex level of VFR weather minimums. So if you're flying 1,200 feet or less above the surface, regardless of the mean sea level altitude, in the day, you need just to have 1 statute miles of visibility and remain clear of clouds. At night, you need 3 statute miles of visibility. And again, you need to stay 1,000 feet above or 500 feet below and 2,000 feet horizontally away from the clouds. If you're more than 1,200 feet above the surface, but less than 10,000 feet MSL, during the day, 1 statute miles of visibility. And then you need to be, again, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally from the clouds. And at night, 3 statute miles visibility. And again, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally away from the clouds. And then the last scenario is when you're more than 1,200 feet above the surface and at or above 10,000 feet MSL. You need 5 statute miles of visibility, and you need to be above or below, at least 1,000 feet above or below the clouds, and have at least 1 statute miles visibility or horizontal separation from the clouds. So that basically summarizes our National Airspace System and the various types of airspace within it, as well as the dimensional information of each one of those airspaces and the cloud separation and visibility that you need while operating aircraft in those types of airspace. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.